Everyone. Welcome to our Storied Health Film and Media series for Brown Arts Ignite and the Pandemic Center of the School of Public Health. I'm here to read the fire announcement. In the event of a fire alarm, please proceed calmly to a nearby exit. Leave the building, move away from the doorway. Please note the location of nearby exits. They're in there. The closest exit may not be where you entered. Be aware that the way that you entered may not be the most direct way out. Please do not sit in the aisles and doorways. No smoking in any university building, and please silence your cell phones. Thank you so much. And
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm Jennifer Nuzzo. I'm director of the Pandemic Center and professor of epidemiology at the Brown School of Public Health. Welcome. This is our fourth screening in the Our Storied Health series, and I am really pleased to be able to show to you tonight a film called Power of the Dream. As I mentioned, this is the fourth in our series. When we were trying to think of what we were going to show for this screening that was happening in October, we decided thematically we wanted to show a film that was about voting, elections, and democracy. So that was this kind of organizing principle around showing this film. That said, though the films that we show don't all have a direct tie-in to the pandemic or the Pandemic Center, we are just trying to explore health through a storytelling narrative. This film actually does have a connection to the issues that we hear about the Pandemic Center. We are trying to explore through this series how we can use storytelling and narrative as a public health intervention. And in the case of this film, a public health intervention served as sort of a catalyst. So while the WNBA's while they were in this COVID bubble, players seized the opportunity to organize and model effective political coalition building that ended up changing the course of their sport and US history. It really checks all the boxes for us in terms of an important film thematically. After the film screening, we are going to have a really incredible panel discussion that will focus on democracy and activism and the impact of these players on public health and the power of narrative to move hearts and minds in both political and health discourse. So I want to get right into this incredible film. And so without further ado, please enjoy tonight's feature presentation of Power of the Dream. What'd you think? So we're less than 2 weeks away from Election Day, and just chatting with folks even before we screen the film, I know everybody is feeling a little bit tense. I hope you take from this a feeling that democracy is really important and that individuals, particularly when they work with those around us, can make big changes. I hope we kind of feel empowered going into the next 2 weeks. There's a lot to unpack with this film, and to help us do that, we have an incredible panel. I'm going to introduce our panelists. Moderating the panel discussion, we have the co-founder and co-curator of Our Storied Health Film and Media series, Dr. Jen Galvin. Dr. Galvin is a public health scientist, prized filmmaker. She recognized very early the incredible power of films as a public health tool, and those of us around her are just catching up to that idea. So please welcome her to the stage. And joining Jen, we have with us in person here, Lucia Hulsether. Did I pronounce your name correctly? Okay, I realized I didn't ask your pronunciation of your last name. Apologies for that. Lucia is a senior fellow at the Brown University Center for the Study of Race and Ethnicity in America and an assistant professor of religious studies at Skidmore College. And her work focuses on capitalism and labor, histories of social movements, feminist theory, popular culture and media, and other topics, and contemporary cultural critique. She wrote a book called Capitalist Humanism, which won the 2024 Best First Book Prize from the Cultural Studies Association. Welcome, Lucia. When we were trying to figure out who's a panelist for this, we had a very kind of hypothetical, wouldn't it be great if we could find somebody, and it turned out to be exactly you. So thank you for existing and coming to this panel. And then joining us remotely is award-winning documentary filmmaker and founder of the production company Trilogy Films, Dawn Porter, who directed this film. Her work has appeared on ESPN, Netflix, HBO, PBS, and Discovery. Is screened at Sundance Film Festival. And I'm heartened to say that just this week, Dawn was the recipient of a 2023 National Humanities Medal, which was presented by President Biden at the White House. She directed and also produced Power of the Dream. So please give our panel a very warm welcome.
Great. I think Dawn Porter is stuck in traffic, so she will join us shortly. But thank you, Jennifer Nuzzo, and also we should congratulate you on being inducted into the National Academy of Medicine. So the line that stood out for me watching this film now for the second time is supporting the people that surround us. And I love that line because it just really nails the spirit of the work that we do as public health practitioners. So Lucia, until Dawn jumps on the screen, why don't we dive in with you?
Perfect.
And I know you're a big basketball fan, so
Yes.
maybe you can also shed some light on this year's season. But when we think about this film, how does it help us make connections between politics, culture, and collective health? And how can stories like Power of the Dream expand what we think when we say public health?
Thank you so much for that question. Thanks to everybody for being here and for inviting me. I have to just say up front that I've said this to some of y'all already, that, you know, that old like MTV, I think it was on MTV, the show Punk'd, where they convince people that they're winning the lottery or they're meeting their celebrity hero or something. When I got the email inviting me to do this, I was like, am I being punked? This is so 100% what I would like to be doing with my evening right now, that I didn't even believe it was true. And so it really is. It's really exciting to be here. Thank you. So I need to give a disclaimer that my training is not in public health, which is part of why it's an honor to be in conversation with you all. And I know that I'm going to learn a lot from this conversation. So when I think, take public health comments with a grain of salt. But I think, when I think about public health, I think about the question of how systems of power that intersect affect the health of people and entire populations. And so to be a good public health practitioner, to think about public health, you can't just think about did they get the vaccine? But how is racism affecting health outcomes? How are systems of heterosexism, misogyny, classism, infrastructures that make care available or not, influencing how people can live. And to me, this film, The Power of a Dream, really brings all of those issues together, not just because of the women and players at the center of the film in the WNBA, but also because of the setting, right? This is a film about labor politics. There's a labor union that plays an enormous role in political movement building here. There are questions of collective action and people having to change their minds and think about how they are going to act and take responsibility towards kind of collective liberation. It's happening in the midst of election and a pandemic. So really all of these intersections are coming together, and I think it's just the perfect film to be shown in a public health setting because it expands our imagination about those things. I'm curious what you think.
Well, I was excited to choose a film like this because I wanted to find a film that felt motivating. This is the fourth film in our series. We've spanned films about anti-vaxxers. We've talked about environmental justice. We watched a film about the opioid crisis. And so given this election season, I really wanted to find a film that touched on themes of democracy and elections and active citizenry that were connected to sort of the underpinnings of public health, but that felt really motivating. That felt important to me. So, and what's neat as a scientist turned filmmaker is that oftentimes with films, we focus on individual stories, sort of power of one stories, and even in the title, it's power of the dream. Mm-hmm. So it's really nice to see a film and to be challenged by a story structure that focuses on groups and communities, because that's what we do in public health. We focus beyond the individual, and we focus on the health of populations. Mm-hmm. So we'll keep, is Don? No, that's me.
Yeah, that's you.
I thought that was John for a minute.
Uh-huh.
We'll keep cruising with you. So since
Hello,
COVID,
it is Dawn. I don't know if you can hear me.
Hi, Dawn. Welcome.
Thank you. I was listening. Not sure if you wanted me to jump in or just listen.
Yes, feel free to jump in, but we do have a first question for you.
Great. And apologies. As I'm sure you all know, there is a ticker tape parade happening here in New York City, where I live, tomorrow. We have something to celebrate, the first basketball championship. So
yes, go Liberty.
A lot of road closures. So
that's great. So Dawn, you often have made, retrospective historical films. And so I'm wondering what drew you to this story, and perhaps can you bring us into the process of how your storytelling process might have changed when you're capturing history unfolding in real time?
Yeah. Well, what's interesting about this film is Sue Bird. It was really Sue Bird's idea. Sue Bird, she's featured prominently in the movie. But as they were kind of going through pandemic, so we came to the film after. So we kind of had to do a historical, kind of look back at this time. And I was interested, I've made films about historical figures, as you pointed out. But what really, really grabbed me is that these young women, they just kind of leapt into action. The WNBA has always been very, very political. And I very much appreciate your comment about group action, because that was something that was extremely important to them. They did not want to put forward only their superstars. They wanted to have collective action. And so they leaned on their prior history. They had just come out of doing this collective bargaining agreement, which really empowered them and also gave them a lot of leadership skills. So there was that. But I had also done a series called 37 Words, which is about Title IX. Title IX is a civil rights law. It is synonymous with sports for so many people, because that is how it is very often enacted, often used. But it is a civil rights law that is 37 words that says, essentially that women should be treated equally in higher education. So I had that history in mind when coming to this story, that these women were really kind of the continuation of this collective action to work for the benefit of all women.
Yes. Since we have you, before you lose just in case you lose any connection, I wanted to ask you a follow-up question, just in terms of, your films about political and social activism across, spanning a range of topics and stories. And then your films are really deployed to inspire more social change. And I'm just wondering, when you reflect on the body of your work as a whole, is there a key ingredient for you for films that are about social change that you think are extra successful in inspiring more social change with audiences? Is there something that you have noticed as a pattern as a storyteller, or something that future storytellers can kind of look forward to identify in a story that really might make a difference?
I think the most important thing, first of all, I think every story can help social change. And I think the common element to all of the filmmaking, particularly visual making, but also radio, podcast, print, but what visual storytelling enables you to do is to empathize with people in a very visceral way. And so when I made a film about abortion activists in the South, people and I include myself in this, because I had not had an abortion, I had not been in an abortion clinic. And so the images that I had in my mind of a clinic were a composite of images from, everything I'd read, negative and positive, probably mostly negative. And so when you actually show people, who is accessing service, who are the people who are being impacted, who are the people providing service, it is this very, very powerful way of kind of demystifying particularly difficult subjects or controversial subjects. And there is something about the human brain that cannot help but seek commonality in some circumstances, which is really, really fascinating phenomenon that I've observed over and over. When you show someone, I'll give you an example. I did a film about public defenders, and we had this young Black man, who was accused of robbing a pizza store of $250. And for that offense, he was facing 15 to life in prison, first offense. And so when I went to embed with his family, and we just filmed with them a couple of times, but when we went to first film with his family, I asked his mother, what was DeMontes like as a baby? And so she said what most mothers say, oh, DeMontes was a very good baby. He was into toys and da-da-da-da-da. And right there, what she does, kind of what you're able to show your audience is, she is a mother like me. And so what your audience brain does, what your human brain does, is you fill in the gaps. How do I feel about my child? How would I feel if my child were grabbed, taken from me, and I might not be able to bail him out? How would I feel? So you're no longer listening as an observer, you're reacting as a person. And so I think that opportunity is available in every story. You can always find the humanity and the people in every story. And that's what you should look for. And that's why I always tell people, show, not tell. I can tell you a horrific story, but if I show you what someone's going through, it is 1,000 times more powerful.
Dawn, I don't know if you were with us earlier and heard this, but congratulations on the National Humanities Medal. Dawn just got back from the White House and was awarded the National Humanities Medal, so that's pretty amazing.
Thank you very much.
Lucia, I guess we'll go back to you. And thinking about, since COVID, public health has really become increasingly branded as a threat to American life, which is quite dangerous in itself. And we know that public health doesn't work without the public. We know that citizen participation is needed for a more inclusive and just democracy. As a researcher and sort of more broadly for the field of public health, is there anything that you think, when you were watching this story that really struck you that we should be paying attention to when it comes to thinking about how to be guided by a community's needs or a group's needs and kind of thinking beyond the individual?
There were people in the W who did not want to go into the bubble. And when we think back now, we're thinking back from a perspective of safety. Now, many people are vaccinated. So we don't have, think back to what it felt like to feel like you were risking something by going to the grocery store, by going outside, by seeing your parents. How many people did not see their parents or their close family members for a long time because they were afraid of, infecting people? So it was not an easy decision by any means for the people to decide to go, but it was also not an easy decision for the leaders to encourage their teammates to go into the bubble. And they had to rely on one another. So, one thing which we showed a bit, but not as much as I would like to, is how much planning and preparation they put into the safety of their teammates. And so they all really, really were dependent upon one another. And they had to obey the social contract. No one could sneak people in. No one could leave. And so what I was thinking about is, the kind of importance of that social compact, that we think about the safety of others in the same way that we think about our own safety. And that is really what they had to harness. And I really strongly was struck by the idea that the reason they were able to effectively do that was because they were teammates. They already had a level of trust. So I actually thought about that quite a bit.
Lucia, do you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the scenes of collective care, of testing, of coming in, of setting boundaries together, where I agree with Dawn, those really struck me. I also think the sort of, in terms of, it takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of time and patience to develop consensus on those kinds of collective sort of social contract norms and agreements. And so I think my favorite parts of the film are when the players are sitting with each other, clearly like in meetings, when Elizabeth Williams is talking about how she had to change her mind about, was she gonna stand up and take a stand, and what kind of risk that was. I mean, we talked a lot and continue to, and should be talking still a lot about risk, and how much risk are people gonna take on for things like virus exposure during COVID. But the kinds of social risks, economic risks, political risks that the players were navigating, and that I think the film shows really beautifully, were standing next to and with all of the health risks that were happening there. I'm forgetting what the original question was, sort of about things that stood out public health wise. I think, yeah, the possibilities, but also real difficulties of collective action that is not always glamorous, I think really stood out to me, and how care work happens in those in those moments. Like, I kept thinking about all the things in the film that we didn't see before that big win for Warnock.
Yeah.
I think that's yeah, I'm sorry, my car is beeping. I think that's a really, really critical observation. And I was very, very moved, like emotionally moved by just what you're describing. And I was even more impressed and really like inspired by the fact that they are so young. So these, some of them are just coming out of college, or they're, or they didn't finish college.
They're
So we're talking people from, am I breaking up?
Oh no, sorry, I jumped in. I said some of them were graduating while they were in the bubble.
That's right. So when you think about what that, like, my children are older than some of these women. And so the maturity and the level of organization and calm when they were literally risking not only their economic livelihoods, but health, but also the social pressure. Courtney Williams, who was is a star now on the Minnesota Lynx, was playing for a different team then, but she wasn't sure she wanted to do political work when they were in the bubble. She's like, I'm here because so many people depend on me for their livelihood. And I think this is a huge difference in women's sports, women's basketball, than in men's basketball. When the men stop their season, all of them are millionaires, all of them, without exception, from just their salary, not to talk about, endorsements, etc. None of the women are millionaires, none, not one. So when you talk about risk, there's bravery and risk at quite a different level.
One of the things I was thinking about before coming here tonight is, we watched this film about the Wubble, and I think about how advantageous it is for organizing to have a common space and common spaces to gather, and I think that probably really enhanced the communication among the players. And then I kind of had to check myself and think, the fact that they had to go to the bubble was a sign of their vulnerability in the first place. What would it have been that, there's this really great sequence. As a union organizer person who came up through graduate union organizing, I loved all labor organizing parts, and I hope we can talk more about that. There's this place where Nneka Ogwumike is saying, the hardest conversation she ever had to have was going to the Board of Governors and saying, we want 100% of our pay. And I moved from my WNBA super fan sicko mode of yes, I really wanted to watch WNBA games all that summer, and that was what got me through the pandemic, to wait a minute, shouldn't they have been getting more pay at least? Shouldn't they have been getting hazard pay? What if the WNBA, or the NBA for that matter, had said, hey, this is very unsafe and an enormous hardship, not just physically, socially, economically, all of those things. You all are in the midst of fighting the scourge of anti-Black violence in this country. We'll pay you and you don't have to play. And what would it be to imagine a world where that would have been possible? I would have been really sad as a fan, but as an organizer, as somebody who wants equity and health safety, and who knows that the people throughout COVID who have had to go to work and work in the most vulnerable jobs weren't there because they wanted to be. They were there because they had to be, as Courtney Williams said so well. That is sort of that contradiction, I think, is embedded in the film. They had this possibility, this space to organize, and the fact that they were there was a sign of vulnerability.
Yeah.
I think that that's exactly right. And I also think that, the players of the W, and like many marginalized groups, you often operate from a place of scarcity because you are so used to fighting for so when she said it was the hardest thing to do to ask for our pay, that does land in a different way when you think about exactly what you just said, which is, wait a minute, shouldn't you be asking for hazard pay for considering doing this? But I think that points to, and that points to the struggles of a lot of people who were making the decision about, and sometimes without much choice. Do I go to work here? Do I have the option to not work? And for some people, if the answer is no, what does that mean for our workforce? What does that mean for our society? I went to Swarthmore, and which is a Quaker, originally a Quaker institution, and so there were a number of places during college where we would really have to, we decided to make decisions through consensus. Consensus is hard. You think you're all for consensus until that one person disagrees and you want to go home. Consensus is hard. And I think Nneka and Sue and the other leaders, they were really, without identifying it, they really were looking for consensus. They did not, and I really saw this, and when we talked to the players, even some players we didn't feature, they did not pressure people to go along. They met people where they were. And I think that's very rare. It's this non-hierarchical leadership style that is very mature and very rare. And in this case, it was very, very effective.
Don, having made, a great documentary about leaders like John Lewis, was there a moment making this film where not that there's a playbook to successful activism, but was there a moment where you thought they've got this is going to work? Or was there a moment, where you just thought, oh my, this is going to be a disaster, they're jumping into this election to support Warnock, and I don't think this is going to work out for them?
No one has asked me that, and that is a spectacular question. There was no moment when I didn't believe in them, and I'll tell you a couple of reasons why. One is when they have that very difficult meeting with Courtney, where they're talking, and you see Nneka. She's calling on the people she knows have doubts. She's platforming their voices. She's not kind of gathering people and doing what, conventions do, which is gather the strength and pound down the naysayers. She did the opposite of that. And so you see that, number one. And then the second thing you see is this was really such an organically led movement. So I think it was the Minnesota Lynx who first wore the T-shirts. And then you hear a really sophisticated leadership commentary, which is the players understood that the Atlanta Dream had a different experience because it was their owner, think about the terminology, their owner was the person who they were protesting. If you play for another team, you're protesting, but she can't fire you. You play for the Dream, and you're literally, she could just wipe you all out, and start over. There's a line of people who would like to play in the W, right? So when you see that sensitivity and really like that emotional intelligence, and that's what they demonstrated. It is the case that the women of the W are, in many cases, really well educated. They are just more mature and sophisticated. And I'm not saying if you're not traditionally educated that you're not intelligent, but I think having that ability to kind of become such effective leaders during college, I think that was very, very helpful in this situation.
Yeah. I think since Dawn is in the car, I'm going to open it up to the audience earlier, just in the case that we lose her connection. So do we have any questions from the audience for Dawn or Lucia? The mics are going to be passed.
So I'm at my house. I could run upstairs and get on camera, or I'm happy to stay here.
Oh, yeah, we'd love to see you.
Okay. All right. Give me like 3 minutes.
3 minutes, okay.
All right. So I'm going to hang up and so that you won't hear my beeping car trying to park.
Great.
Like this? Can you hear me? Okay. It's for both of you guys, but we can wait till Dawn comes back. But I was just wondering if you guys could give your opinions on the just recent WNBA season of like all of the like things that were going on with like the narrative between Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese and like the way the media painted that, and then also the comments by what's the commissioner's name of the WNBA? Kathy
Engelbert.
Yeah, and like the controversy that happened when she like basically didn't deny that narrative between Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark was bad. So yeah.
I'll let you. She's a super fan, so I'll let her take this one.
Yeah. So tell me your name again. Zahara. Zahara is, I think that probably a lot of you in the room are WNBA fans. So, but what Zahara is talking about is, as I understand it, and you jump in and correct me. So with Caitlin Clark being drafted into the league, outstanding player out of Iowa, drafted to the Indiana Fever, and Angel Reese, who's an outstanding player out of LSU, drafted to Chicago. Caitlin Clark is white, Angel Reese is black. At least 80%, maybe more, of WNBA players are black women. There was, and has been historically from ESPN, from the league, an extraordinarily disproportionate spotlight on and pattern of advancing and just spotlighting white women in the league. And this is a problem of systemic racism and white supremacy and misogyny. And also, I think a lot of times more femme women, both black and white and non-Black people of color get spotlit too. So we see all of these systems of oppression in the forms of representation, who's getting paid, who's getting the big contracts, who's getting spotlit. So the League, when Caitlin Clark, who has had this sort of Caitlin Clark mania in college, she's in, just like nobody's knocking Caitlin Clark's like extraordinary skills. She comes into the League, and with her come a lot of bandwagon fans who, excuse me, that was rude, but I'll just say it. We have new fans coming into the League who are fans of Caitlin Clark, coming out of Iowa, coming to games, and it's great for the League to have new fans. And I think actually, Jen, one of the questions you were going to ask is sort of how does a league like the WNBA that is so vulnerable, as Holly Rowe talks about quite a lot in the film, balance having kind of strong, principled political stances and trying to stay viable when it is a business and a workplace that is dependent on fan support. I personally, though this is Lucia speaking, for myself, I think the League made some really bad decisions. I think Kathy Engelberg did a pretty terrible job of leading the League through this moment. So for those that don't know, a lot of Caitlin Clark and Iowa fans came to games with really profoundly racist signs, taunting Black players on the other teams. Lots of media played into these narratives by just kind of ginning up this idea that Black players especially hated Caitlin Clark, and these veteran players were out to get Caitlin Clark, and they were punching her and they were being rough with her. And I think there's an underlying sexism here too, this idea that women's sports leagues don't play physical. And Caitlin Clark herself, though she is young, I mean, there are lots of examples of white players who were able to make the tepid, sometimes though they were, statements about the kinds of privileges that were accruing to them as white people in the league. So Cameron Brink is an example of someone who said, I understand that I am being depicted differently than my Black teammates. Caitlin Clark did not make very strong stances about it. Now, Kathy Engelbert then made a statement, which I think is the one, Sahara, you're referring to, where she was asked about the racism and said, well, Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, they used to have Celtics, LA, they used to have this rivalry without, and that's good for sports, without identifying the forms of white supremacy and anti-Blackness that were fueling this, fueling those narratives in the media. And so, I mean, I see that Dawn is here. We're talking about, the question, Dawn, was about commenting on the Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese media narratives that had gone on, kind of what was going on with this WNBA season this year. And I just kind of summarized it for our group, but I'll just say that one thing I think The Power of the Dream is really, really helpful with, all the people who are like, oh, look at how the WNBA players hate each other and there's a cat fight and all of this, could maybe learn from this excellent film, is how deep the solidarity is, and how, and perhaps people who think that the WNBA needs to be catering to a racist fan base could watch this film and say, maybe there's something else here that is full of potential if they don't.
I completely agree with that. And, I also have to thank you all for your patience with, it is ironic that it's literally the WNBA traffic closures that made me late. But, I had the real pleasure of Sue Bird and I were doing press together to support the film. And so she was, this was really in the throes of Caitlin kind of mania, and Sue just wouldn't take that bait. And she, is a very honest, straightforward person. And she just, shut down that conversation, or, which was sometimes even more powerful and effective, she would raise the race question. And say, what she'd observed is how differently players of different backgrounds were being treated. It is very, very powerful to have that message come from a white woman, to come from an ally, because it's, she's speaking of what she's observing. And Sue's in that rare position where she's been in majority minority circumstances at her workplace of work, which is not a usual circumstance. So I have the utmost respect for Sue and for NECA and how they really led together and how they did something that I thought was also so mature and so powerful, which is, you know, when Leisha said, I can't take this next thing on, I'm kind of full. And Sue was like, now is my place to step in. And they just kind of handed that off and supported each other that way too. And to me, that's where as a filmmaker, you kind of like, you can show not tell a little bit, you know, you can have people explain that that's what they were doing and why that was necessary. And so I really appreciated both of them, you know, sharing that exchange.
Is there another question from the audience? Oh, down in front.
I'd love to ask your thoughts, given the moment where we are, less than 2 weeks out from election, and sort of any takeaways that you have from the film and in terms of the power of collective action. I realize, you know, we should be having this conversation months ago, but there still is time. I see a number of I voted stickers on folks today, but maybe some folks haven't. And just any advice that you can offer for people who are sitting here, who may be inspired by the film, but maybe came into this screening very anxious about where we are in this moment and the stakes.
I am very anxious about this moment and the stakes. So I certainly share that feeling. I made a film about Congressman John Lewis, and so we followed him for a year, and it was during the 2018 midterms, which of course were really, you know, really important kind of set of elections. And I remember during that time, I would say to him, you know, Mr. Lewis, I'm so worried about kids in cages, families being separated, the rhetoric, just all of it. And he would say, and I think about this pretty much all the time, he would talk about how he kind of approached problems. There's an immediate action, there's kind of a mid-level action, then there's a long-term goal. And so what he would constantly say to me and to others, there's always something that you can do. And so he shifted in that one sentence, he shifted the power to me. What can you do? Think about what you can do instead of being paralyzed by what we feel we cannot. And so sometimes what you can do is support yourself or support a friend. Sometimes you can do more than that. You can write some cards, you can go connect with people. But thinking about that in the what can I do versus all the ways that I feel stifled or suppressed, I have found very, very helpful. So, you know, what I'm doing is showing up and having conversations with people. A lot of my friends are door knocking. That's not my style. That makes me too anxious to do. But I can drive people places. I can even sometimes I can just find a quiet place and think and read something so that I'm informed. That is doing something. Having conversations that are informed is doing something. That is, you are now being an active part of our democracy. You are going to speak with authority because you've read something and understood it deeply. Please do not underestimate that. We are living in a time where people do not have the benefit of this kind of education. They don't have the benefit of being pushed to think and to think about things with complexity and nuance. So thinking about things with nuance, that is something that you can do.
Lucia?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I agree with everything that Dawn just said. The other thing I would add is that we, of course, are probably very anxious about the upcoming election in 2 weeks. And I heard someone say recently, like, history isn't won in elections. Empires pass, or just the arc of history is very, very long, and politics is with us, and life or death stakes are with us actually every day, not just measured in when is there a presidential election. And so in some ways that, it raises the stakes, but it also distributes them. So yes, like get people to the polls, help people vote, write the cards, read things, all of those things. But the urgent, I think part of the way we could historicize the conundrum that we're in right now and rising fascism, frankly, is the seeding of the political at times outside of direct elections. And so how can systems and sort of infrastructures for organizing, for caring for our neighbors, for having those hard conversations with people so that they are primed to act when the moment is essential. What can we do there? One thing I really appreciate about the film and the scene setting is how it starts in 20. So like the Warnock-Loeffler election, that's 2020, but the film brings us back to 2016, and in fact, even to 1996, and the intervention that is the WNBA and the Minnesota Lynx stepping out. It was because the Minnesota Lynx wore those T-shirts and took a risk, and the police who were doing security for them walked out. They took that risk, and that was the basis on which there could be more organizing later. And so even if it's not towards the election in 2 weeks, what are the other things, the commitments, the forms of solidarity, whether with workers, with people in Palestine, with folks who are suffering now, that we can show such that there is greater power the next time something big is at stake, because there is already something big at stake, of course.
Yeah, I guess for me too, during this election season, I think a lot about being scared of politics and just constantly reminding myself as a scientist turned filmmaker that health is political. People are making decisions about your health, about your family's health every day on a grassroots level and on the federal level. So it's not the time to shy away from, I can't get political. Health is very much political. So I think just as a sort of reminder, not to be scared of it. And my hope, and part of the goal of our Storied Health, is that not only are we going to show best-in-class stories, but I hope that it inspires you to tell your own in whatever way, whether it's with a camera or a pen or a dance, to express your own stories. So I think that that's a important thing to remember. Any other questions in the back?
Thanks so much for this film and this conversation. Really wonderful. My question is sort of about this most recent season has been sort of like a smash success in terms of viewership, in terms of like folks paying attention to the W and stuff like that. And I wonder if any of the three of you have thoughts on sort of the future of, and like what all of this attention means for the W as a workplace, as a political organizing unit, as I think there's this like sort of natural, I won't say natural, but this idea that maybe the W is evolving towards the image of the NBA in some respect. And I wonder if any of you have thoughts on that.
I have a lot of thoughts on that. Like I mentioned that I did this series with Nicole Newnham, who's a spectacular director. She's, among her many films, is this film Crip Camp, which I highly nominated for an Oscar, which I highly recommend to you, about disability kids in disabled kids in a camp. It's a really, really important question. And I do think about it kind of generationally. We are definitely still in a moment where, even with the success of the WNBA, their latest collective bargaining agreement, the top players still make less than $300,000 a year, which is not small. It's certainly in the top earners of American workers, but compared to the salaries of the NBA, it is woefully inadequate given their level of commitment and how short their playing lives are. So I say that to say there's a lot of work to do. There's no danger that they are going to become LeBron level, Steph Curry paid kind of, isolated in mansions, billionaires anytime soon. And so I think that in the DNA of the W, how they were created was through this collective action. It took multiple times to even get to a professional women's league for it to succeed. I think that the generation coming in is not having experienced, Sue Bird is a generation where there was no opportunity to play even. And now this generation there's not only an opportunity to play, but there's attention. And so as each generation goes on, it is up to the generation before to say, remember where you came from. And so while we all wish them every success, I think that right now, in the DNA of the W is how hard fought it is to get people to pay attention to their sport, and is still, I don't think their success is guaranteed without a lot of work and a lot of bargaining. There's a lot of room to grow, and I think their history is going to be part of that story. So that's kind of I don't think they're going to be assholes anytime soon.
I have a lot of thoughts about this too. I'll try to keep it brief. I think for a long time and still in conversations about the WNBA, there's been this idea that like there's some charity case of the NBA or something like that, and that people like don't want to watch. Like, it's just like it's helping the NBA like launder their own like systemic sexism by helping the WNBA, but like they're not really worth watching. Okay, everyone knows that's false. Everybody watches women's sports, etc. Okay, let's put that on the table. But I think that also this is just like a fundamental misunderstanding of supply and demand. If the WNBA is getting like basically gerrymandered out of any kind of meaningful coverage, nobody can watch them. And so I think like I'm nobody, right? Like I'm some professor of religion, but if I'm like gaming it out, like they need a better TV deal. They need to have better TV deal, more national coverage. And I also think, I think that like we forget, and to Dawn's point, there's no danger of them approximating the NBA anytime soon, for better or worse. Like a lot of players in the WNBA, several teams, like they don't even have their own lockers yet. They don't even have their own practice facilities. And so $73,000. Right. 70.
Or if you're like, working at a meeting, if you work in the factory, you're going to be making more money than she does.
Yeah, and for as much celebration, rightfully so, as that CBA got, like if you go and actually read the CBA, there are a lot of like very not advantageous things in that collective bargaining agreement. Like policies around, obviously the salary stuff, especially for the players who are not the veterans and not the superstars, things about housing and how teams can provide or not housing for their players, the kinds of like transportation. Lots of players are playing for a few months out of the year in cities where they don't live. Things about prioritization. So right now, if a player to like up their salary goes and plays overseas, they might have to like make a zero-sum choice between playing for their overseas team and playing in the WNBA, the best league in the world, but not paying players like they're worth that. And so I think that as much as, after any collective bargaining agreement victory, there's a lot of showing of aren't we all getting along? Kathy Engelbert, Neko McKay standing there being like, look, we won like full maternity benefits. That was a hard fought battle, and they had to push the ownership very, very hard in order to get to that place, and had to make a lot of concessions. So you all may know the players, they've opted out of their collective bargaining agreement, and so it'll be another like big moment to try to win better benefits. But I think that like really labor, thinking about this as labor and a workplace, populated by Black queer women, like that's the baseline we have to use, and that will never be what the NBA is. And so then how do we think about creating a workplace and a fan culture around it that that reflects feminism, anti-racism, justice, etc. And the players are the ones who lead that.
Right. Any other in the back? Yeah.
Thank you so much. My question is related to this sort of new crop of rookies who come into the league with name, image, and likeness deals, and what impact rookies coming in who are already millionaires before they've played a WNBA game, how is that going to affect the sense of solidarity and that was established, in the bubble where they were like, we all need to be here because of a paycheck, and we're all in the same boat together. And now you have, players coming out of college who have, 7-figure endorsement deals. When you have this sort of income equality that's very sort of unequally distributed, how does that impact sort of this type of collective action that they were very successful at cultivating previously?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's an important factor to consider, and it's a new factor to consider. This was not even an option, until very recently. I do think that the solidarity is born of something bigger than their salaries. I think that the basis for it is actually, mutual respect and this desire to elevate the sport and to elevate women's place in professional sports. That said, the other thing I think we really we don't speak enough about is that this is an overwhelmingly queer community. And so there is, anytime that you are in a community that is discriminated against so deeply, you do not lose your connectivity easily. Because you understand how fragile your popularity can be. I mean, we even saw on the night of the final night, game 5, when I think Sabrina goes to kiss her wife, the ESPN camera turned away to another shot. Would they have done that for LeBron if he went, or Steph Curry went to greet one of his children or his wife? I don't think so. So I think that their connection is deeper than their pay. I do think, they're athletes, they're competitive, they're going to see who's getting the money and who isn't, and that's going to impose some tension. But I think at least right now, and but you're right to point out, like, this is something to watch for. Having spent some time around the players, I feel like they are quite aware of the potential dangers to their collective strength. But people are people, so we shall see, right?
I also think the NIL passed because the NCAA is trying to preserve its own legitimacy, given all the challenges by player activism and organizing. So they're getting sued for antitrust, and so NIL becomes this thing that they're allowing. And so if we sort of think about NIL as a product of that kind of standing up for justice by players, I think that maybe that helps sort of change the picture. But I think that solidarity is always such a fragile thing, right? It's not just that the league is fragile, it's that solidarity is fragile as people's interests change and folks respond to their vulnerability. Just as people respond to their wealth differently, people respond to their vulnerabilities differently by locking it down and saying, no, I'm not going to take any risks, or by taking more risks. And I think that, the kinds of political education and networks will make the difference about how that swings one way or another.
That's great. Any other questions from the audience or comments? Beck, do you have one? No. Oh, Mark. She wants to use the mic so you can get it recorded.
Colin Kaepernick, what's the lesson learned there? Why didn't that go so well?
Well, I have thoughts about that too. I think one thing you see in and it's such a stark contrast to the experience of the WNBA is Colin as a leader but very much as an individual. Really, only a handful of people were kneeling next to him, and so his sacrifice largely became symbolic. You know, whereas it's much harder to ignore an entire league. You know, I think we literally were seeing the power of collective action. Colin's fine. You know, I mean, I think he really, really misses the ability to play. And I think his objections and his social activism were deeply held. Um, but you know, you do point out that the women of the W were protesting before Colin took a knee. And, you know, and they say that with no disrespect. Um, so you know, I think that there's certainly, you know, my takeaway is I wish he didn't have to stand alone. You know, I don't know if he recruited his fellow teammates or if he, you know, hoped that they would follow. And I think that that's part of the lesson is that they did not follow.
I mean, I think that for me, the lesson, I mean, Colin Kaepernick, like super important figure, super important action. And I think for me, I mean, the takeaway of this film is, yeah, no Lone Rangers. I think it's really, really meaningful, and I'm being a broken record on this, that they organize through a labor union that is teaching people in its kind of connective tissues how to have solidarity and how to come together and to have each other's back. So there's that moment where where Terry Jackson, the leader of the players union, says, you know, the vet players who are making a lot more money than the rookies say, hey, if you get fined, we have your back. So what does it mean to not just like say we're all going to do this together, but we know that the risks are not evenly distributed, so we're going to figure out how to distribute them. And that is very unsexy work. It's work that doesn't usually get a platform like this. So thank you for the film, Dawn, that shows us. And it's the kind of consideration that like it's not learned overnight, and it doesn't necessarily come naturally in a world where people are taught to be hyper individuated and to look out only for themselves. We have to unlearn those kinds of individualistic forms of consciousness that, you know, that are proliferate through our workplaces. And I think the WNBA Players Union and the experience of the CBA negotiating for it like set the stage for a really different kind of care. I know very little about the NFL, so I don't know what their union is like, but it seems like, you know, Colin Kaepernick wasn't working with that same level of sort of infrastructure that had such a kind of intersectional regard for the experiences and stakes for the people involved. And therefore, he did not have the kinds of allyship that he might have needed. So while it was a hyper you know, it was like hyper visible when it happened because of the singularity of it in the context of the evil NFL. The quality of the impact was really different with the WNBA, and it's still everybody knows who Colin Kaepernick is. People don't know that the WNBA flipped the Senate. Even they did this amazing thing, but they're like not getting the spotlight for it, and that's sometimes what collective action is. It's not about heroes.
Well said. Anything else you want to add, Dawn? Or things that you're working on next that you want to share?
I'm really happy to be here. I'm sorry I can't be there with you. My husband went to Brown, and so we are big Brown fans, even though I went to another small liberal arts college. I am working on now, we're about to come out with a 4-part series for MSNBC. It's about wrongfully incarcerated people. This reporter, through his reporting and his work with lawyers, over 20 years, filmed his efforts to help get people exonerated from Sing Sing Correctional Facility. And he was successful in getting 6 men out of prison, and he filmed for 20 years. And we have all that footage. And so we created a series. And then I'm working on a film about Winnie and Nelson Mandela, emphasis on the Winnie. Complicated person, very, very misunderstood. But I'm very, very excited to kind of dispel some myths and, you know, kind of explore her brilliance and her cruelty. Which I don't know. Sometimes I guess they can be two sides of a coin, but it's an exciting film. We've done a lot of work in South Africa with some local filmmakers, so I'm really, really excited about it.
That's great. Lucia, any books, research you want to share?
I'm working on a couple of projects about political education in the U.S. One on college competitive debate, and especially at Christian schools, and the other been about girls' state and boys' state, the American Legion projects. I had my appendix out yesterday, so I'm up here in some agony. Mostly, I'm just growing my stomach back. Yeah.
Lucia gets, Dawn, you get the moving award for going from cart to home, but Lucia gets the MVP for having surgery yesterday and her appendix out.
Do what women do.
That's right. Exactly. Well, thank you all for coming. I really have just come to love these events, and I'm so grateful that Nuzzo has given us the opportunity and Brown Arts Ignite to start our Storied Health with the idea of, reframing the narratives around public health, and hopefully stories like Power of the Dream will inspire us to rewrite the public health communications playbook, because it needs to be. A few thank yous. Thank you to the Brown Arts Institute and Brown Arts Ignite series, especially Owen Carson, who helped us with this program, and Melissa Kiefman. Thank you to the Pandemic Center team who helped put this event together: Bentley Holt, Leah Lovegren, Andrea Ulig, Michael Mitchell, Alice M, and Ann Wang. There's a survey that you can give feedback on tonight's event. You can access it through the QR code. There should be some maybe pinned up around the exit doors. And last, stay tuned for our Storied Health event, which is slated for Monday, December 2nd. So thank you all for coming. Thank you, Dawn. Thank you, Lucia.